Hi, I'm Shay Oliver. Welcome to the Priority Paradigm. I'm sharing stories of amazing people who've made radical changes to their lives for something more important. Today, I'm joined by Amy Angelilli, and she has a wonderful story to tell us. So without further ado, Amy, take it away.
Thanks, Shay. So I am from Philadelphia originally, and there's a difference between growing up in a place and being a resident of that place as an adult. And I was noticing that my adult friends and I were veering in much different directions because most of my friends in Philadelphia were transplants. And so they really, really, really embraced all the things the city had to offer. And I realized that I was winding down on my journey because my journey was 35 years old. And I had sort of done everything that I had wanted to do, from my hometown.
Sure.
And I knew that because of my background in social responsibility marketing, because of my work in animal welfare, because of my new hobby in improv comedy, that there was going to be a place that was going to offer me some richer, not necessarily monetarily richer opportunities, but richer in terms of personal and professional growth. Mm-hmm. So as I was shutting down locally, I was also flying myself to interviews all over the country, and I would call myself, I was always the bridesmaid, but never the bride. So I was always first runner-up. The Houston SPCA, Petco Foundation, all of these major names in animal welfare. And I finally pinpointed Denver, Colorado, because of its, rich place in animal welfare. They were really on the cutting edge. This was about 2006. Mm-hmm. And I flew myself to another interview, and I didn't get the job. I was first runner-up again. Oh. And I said, I need to take a leap of faith, and I need to go where there's opportunity, even if the opportunity isn't obvious. And so I decided to move to Colorado, to move to Denver, move to the Front Range without a position lined up, not knowing a soul, having no safety net, and knowing that it was a rich enough animal welfare community that something would find me. There'd be a place for me somewhere. Sure. Meanwhile, in my personal life, I had gotten divorced in Philadelphia, and my ex-husband and I had become very good friends again. And he was very fond of Colorado, and his best friend from childhood lived there. And he said, well, why don't we go together and we can try again? Because, of course, your problems don't follow you when you change geographic areas. Never. Ever. So, of course, I thought, well, that would be an interesting idea. Yeah. Especially since, it was so difficult to divide up all the cats that we had acquired over the years in our local animal welfare work in Philadelphia. I had founded an animal welfare agency. I ran it as a volunteer. And at the time that we split up, we had 12 cats.
Oh, my.
By the time we got back together, we had 18.
Oh, my.
So we moved in an RV to Denver from Philadelphia with 18 cats.
Oh, my gosh.
Neither of us with jobs, and neither of us with any connections except for his one friend from childhood. Yeah. So it was a big leap of faith, and it's kind of the kind of thing that you do when you're 22 or 23 or, but I was told that that's not an appropriate way to exist. You go to college for 4 years, you major in something that you're guaranteed to get a job in, you graduate, and then you get a job in that field. And that's what my father had taught me. And he sent me to college for accounting.
Mm.
And about halfway through school, I was getting D minuses in cost accounting. And I switched my major to marketing, and I was the editor of the student newspaper.
Cool.
And I was the only editor with not in the journalism department, because my father wouldn't let me be part of the journalism department because there's no jobs in that field. And then I got out of school and couldn't find a job, and then finally I did, and I proofread display ads for the Yellow Pages.
Ugh.
Yes, until I finally made my way into corporate, and that's where you're supposed to be.
Right.
And, as time went on, I realized that wasn't for me. I went into PR agency work. I went into nonprofit work. The thing that followed me, no matter what kind of work I went into, though, was each job I had, I would get laid off. And when it sounds terrible, but when you're in your 20s and you get laid off over and over and over again, back to back to back to back, you become very resilient.
Yeah.
And you don't need a lot as a 22-year-old, a 23-year-old, a 24-year-old, and you're able to find jobs easier than when you're in your 40s and when you're in your 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So it made me very resilient, and it enabled me to go out on my own as a PR person while founding this nonprofit animal welfare agency. So by the age of 30, I was doing both after having been laid off multiple times.
Sure.
So it actually led to great personal and professional development for me. And probably had it not been for that, I wouldn't have been as willing to take that risk to up and move in the RV with my ex-husband and 18 cats. And wouldn't you know, the agency in Denver that did not, where I was, the bridesmaid, but not the bride. By the time I landed out in Denver, that position was open again.
Ah.
And they had lost a great amount of funding, but I accepted the position with them part-time, and through fundraising efforts, built it up to full-time again.
Cool.
And, sort of blazed the way for the feral cat community in the Front Range.
Oh, cool.
And then, got very, very involved in improv, which sort of led to the second big change, which of course involved an RV and lots of cats, because that seems to be the way my stories go. So I was in Denver for 9 years, and I definitely was so grateful to have landed where I landed. I created a character called Nurse Nancy Presents, and she did this fantastic social media campaign around unwanted pet pregnancy. And she tried to give birth control pills to dogs and put condoms on cats. And, the message was, oh, that's so hard, just spay neuter. And, I became this D-list celebrity.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Society Reporter was writing about me. All my friends back in Philadelphia said, oh, doesn't Denver have any news? And yeah. And it was great. And meanwhile, I was pursuing improv seriously. And, over that time, a couple of things happened. I sort of achieved what I set out to achieve through animal welfare. The improv became a much bigger part of my life than I ever would have realized. And surprise, surprise, my ex-husband and I didn't work out again. Even though at one point we got up to 22 cats and 2 dogs.
Woo!
Yeah. That's the byproduct of animal welfare work.
Uh-huh.
So, in short, things kind of wound down again, but they wound down in this really appropriate fashion. Because nothing bad happened, nothing traumatic happened, just things were organically coming to an end, which is just like a good improv scene. And so I was able to identify that and then, think about what's next. And luckily I had to have foot surgery, which gave me 10 weeks to think about that because I couldn't move off the couch.
Oh.
And by this time, I was remarried, and I missed being so close to the coast. That was the one detriment when you moved to Denver and
Mhm.
you had coastal access before you got there. You missed the coast. And so I picked up again in an RV with my new husband. Only 8 cats this time,
Okay.
and moved to a little tiny town called St. Augustine, Florida, which is actually America's oldest city.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
America's oldest city, and it's exactly what I wanted. It has character, it has history, it has architecture, it has an arts community, and it didn't have any improv before I got here. So
Oh,
I was able to create from scratch an improv community based on all the years of experience that I had both in Philadelphia and in Denver, and then via all these festivals and workshops and conferences that I've attended, internationally. And it's literally an emerging community now.
that's very, very cool.
Hmm.
So when you decided to leave Denver, what was with things coming down to an end, what either pulled you to Florida or made you kind of start looking in that direction other than the water?
So what I did when I was laid up for those 10 weeks, I had a hit list of what I wanted in a seaside community. And I narrowed it down to 3 places. One was in Florida, one was in Oregon, and one was in Northern California.
Wow.
So they're very, very different.
Yeah.
And this is the place that we visited first. Um, and it turns out I'm an hour south of Jacksonville, and my mother was born in Jacksonville
Wow.
because my grandmother is from Georgia, and she still has cousins that are across northern Florida.
Oh,
So connecting with her favorite cousin in Jacksonville, finding the perfect house, um, seeing the scenery here, realizing how close some international airports are, like everything just pointed to this. The other 2 places we visited, but there was no pull.
hmm
So things were like already in the works here when those other towns uh, were visited, and it's strange how fast it happened because I had foot surgery over the winter holidays, came to St. Augustine in April, and then ended up moving in October of 2015.
Yeah, so less than a year.
Yeah, it was really, really fast.
So you had a hit list of things, you said, of things you
Yeah.
wanted. How did you come up with the list of things that you really wanted in a community?
Um, Really strange. I had been in um, San Francisco to meet up with someone to carpool to a retreat center. And the day the retreat ended, I stayed overnight by myself in San Francisco. And the next morning, I got up really early before my flight to take this amazing walk through the park to this coffee shop I like, to hit the beach. And it was in that time alone that I realized I needed to be near water, but it wasn't just any kind of water. Because one of the things I liked about that walk was because it had the park too.
Mm,
So I didn't want to be in a place that had high rises on the beach.
right.
So when I was laid out with the foot surgery, I sat and I it's almost like a meditation. Like, what kind of community can I visualize? I knew I wanted someplace smaller. I didn't want to live in a city by the water. So like I
Mhm.
didn't want to be in a Miami. I wanted a smaller town, and I wanted a place where people were more prone to connecting. Because I was very, very fortunate. The first house I owned in South Philly, the block was super tight knit, and we had block parties. The kids were in and out of each other's houses. We pet sat for each other. And I just thought, like, oh, this is the way it is when you own a house. Like, your neighbors are your friends and everybody hangs out. I never had that again.
Yeah.
After that block, after I left that block, I never had that again. And that is the kind of thing that I wanted, even if it wasn't in my block. Like, I wanted that connection, and I thought a smaller city might provide that. And I've lived in these big cities, and I wanted that change. I wanted that charming downtown area that was tiny. I wanted a place where word of mouth was really important, because people looked out for each other, because there's so many small businesses, mom and pops, that kind of thing. But not a town that had, 3 months of tourist season and then the rest of the year it's dead. Like,
I hear you.
it's vibrant all year long, all year.
Sure. Wow.
With locals, not just with tourists, with locals. Like, it's an exhausting small town in a good way.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. There's always a festival. There's just always something going on. And I live on a barrier island over the Northern Bridge. And so this weekend was one of those weekends. I just stayed over on my barrier island and just walked to the beach and didn't engage in town at all. And it was like being on a mini staycation,
Nice. Very, very nice. Well, let's go back to Philly, where you grew up. So what were you feeling as you hit your 30s and things weren't how you envisioned the story of your life going? What was going on inside of you as you began that process of moving to Denver?
Mm-hmm. Despite my oddball starts in college, I felt like I got out of college and, with a pit stop at my parents' house, got into, Center City, Philadelphia, did the whole thing where, I was like the creative department and had the fun job with people that I enjoyed. And, we hung out after work, and I was dating and meeting lots of people and having parties and all the stuff. And then once I started to get into social responsibility marketing, I realized that I wanted my time to go towards some sort of causal, transformative experience, whether it was for the environment, or whether it was for animals, or whether it was for, some group of people. And that work takes a lot out of you.
Mm-hmm.
But it also makes you a lot more thoughtful. And as I was getting deeper involved in that, and then becoming so focused on animal welfare, I realized that I was achieving things, but then it's like, well, what would my next step be? Mm-hmm. And, things wrapped up just like in Denver organically, but it was so different because I had been in Philadelphia my whole life, and I traveled, but you know how sometimes you travel and you're like, oh, I can't wait to get back home because I love where I live. Right. When I would get back home, it would be like, ugh, this like burden of being there. Oh. Now when I go home to Philadelphia, I love being there. It's vibrant, it's fun. But it took me a year and 3 months to go home to visit, because I needed to be away from it to appreciate it.
Interesting. So as, being the native, hanging out in Philadelphia, and wanting to leave, that's kind of why are you doing that to a lot of people that are natives there, that have spent their whole lives there. Did you have many people asking you why on earth you'd be considering leaving? Yeah.
I had, it was funny, especially a veterinarian who I was really close with. She had a woman in her office who was out on maternity leave, and she said, could you please do me a favor and fill in for her for a few months? I really, really need some help, and it would be great if you could just do it for a few months before you leave. And I helped her. It was fine. She thought I was going to love it so much that I was going to end up staying. And I gave her my last day, and she's like, you're not really doing that, are you? I said, yeah, I told you this. I told you this. And she said, oh, well, I give you 2 years.
Uh-huh.
So I got a lot of that. Like, some of it was over leaving Philadelphia at all, and some of it was choosing to go to Denver.
Sure.
And, you know, like I said earlier, with the transplants in Philadelphia, they didn't see eye to eye with me on anything because they were living a completely different life. And, you know, with my divorce and dividing up the marital property, you know, you're left with a portion of what you had. And so I was moving like deeper and deeper into the hood too, because that's all I could afford. And, you know, so I would have my transplant friend, you know, who lived in Center City on this beautiful block say, well, I don't understand what you're saying at all. And her husband finally had to, you know, come to my aid because her Philadelphia was like this tiny little area and mine was bigger, and I saw more things, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's lots that you probably didn't want to see.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Seeing. Yeah. So, what were you most afraid of when you moved from Philly in the RV with the ex-husband and the cats? What were you most afraid of making that trip?
I mean, the normal things like finding a job and all that, but I think honestly, the thing I was most afraid of was not doing it. Because I was, and I know that probably sounds cliche, but I was so past ready to do it that, like, my baker friend in Philadelphia made me a cake that said "F you Philly" on it. And I won't even tell you what it looked like, but
That's awesome.
but like I was so over ready, and so like everything in my mind, everything in my body, everything in my soul was like, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, the worst that could have happened was that nothing worked and I ended coming back to Philadelphia or moving in with my parents temporarily, you know, where they live in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. But I mean, something major had to change, and nothing that could have gone wrong would have been big enough to prevent me from having this happen. So the thing that I was most afraid about was not making this happen.
No matter what the risk.
Yeah, no matter what the risk. Yeah.
Very cool.
No, that's not saying like, you know, the next move I wasn't as intense about it. And who knows, like when I might do this again, I might not be intense about it. But at that time, there was no there was nowhere to go but forward.
So you had the same experience when you decided to leave Denver and head to Florida.
Yeah, so this was like a quieter one because it had only been 9 years. But like I had mentioned with like an improv scene wrapping up organically, I totally felt that everything was done. And if I had stayed there, I would have been starting from scratch. And because I was so, I wanted so badly a different environment around me. I wanted to be away from winter. I wanted to be close to the ocean. That if I was going to make that change and start from scratch, I wanted to make that change and start from scratch in a different place.
Sure.
And I've also been really lucky in that I'm kind of like a real estate hobbyist, you know, so I sort of watch markets and what they're doing and, you know, when is it time to leave a place to go to another place, because like I couldn't go back to Denver now because it's so expensive, but it was the best time to sell a house in Denver to move to a different market.
Nice. Very nice. So you've done a lot of changes in life. I mean, you've gone from marketing to animal welfare
Yeah.
to now improv, but you've actually done these with some overlaps.
Hmm.
There's been overlaps while you're doing it. If you could go back and tell your younger self some advice about knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
I would tell her to take more risk early on. Like, I didn't know that there was such a thing as a gap year when I got out of college. And I sometimes tell people, like, I've been living my life backwards, so some of the risks that I've taken in my 30s and my 40s maybe would have been more appropriate to take in my 20s before you buy a house for the first time, before you get married, before you start to accumulate stuff like pets and furniture.
Right.
Um, so I would say to take those risks early on when they're easier to take. When you take a gap year, when you're just getting out of school, it's great because you don't have to have a job in your field immediately and you don't own anything. So you're not paying for anything. And so
Hmm.
if you need to stop along the way to get a waitressing job or whatever, it's fine.
Sure.
Do it.
Absolutely. So, I've actually seen a couple people walk around behind you. Many of them look like younger folks. Um, what do you tell them? Was I right, or I could have been wrong with the age? You're in a theater, so.
There's one person here, so I'm a big sister for Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Very
So
cool.
my little is here, and she's turning 12 next month. She's in 6th grade, and she's really interested in improv, and she's really interested in the theater. Um, and I think that all of those soft skills are equally as important to develop as the math and the science and English and all of that, because it teaches us how to be around a person. And I never had that encouragement. My parents, especially my dad, 100% Italian. Dad was always like, math, sciences, all those things. And yes, they're important, but there's more to growing as a person professionally than the actual skill. And ironically, like all these years later, I'm teaching professionals soft skills because, right? Through improv, because emotional intelligence isn't something that we pick up at school.
Right. Yep. It's not something that you just flip on.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Very cool. So, you say you're actually working with corporate people. Do you ever run into people that kind of hear some of your story and say, "Dang, you're so brave. How did you do that? How did
Yeah.
you make these moves?"
Yeah.
If there's somebody who's contemplating something like you've done to move across the country, completely changing careers, loading up the RV, taking off, what do you tell them? What's the one thing that you tell them?
I always say, sit down in a quiet time by yourself when you're not at the mercy of someone else and their opinions about their own life and about your life and what you should do. Because, like, the hashtag I use for my work, my company is called the Adventure Project, and my hashtag is Find Your Adventure. And that's what I tell all my improv students. It's like, I can't tell you what your improv journey is going to be. You have to find it. And that's how I feel about life. Like, what works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for someone else. And if you want to take this risk because you're in the process of finding your adventure, then you have to do it, because nobody's going to lead you by the hand to do it.
Nice. I like that.
Just like, I get upset when people aren't as like passionate about improv and the Adventure Project and my classes and all this, my workshops, as me. Well, of course I'm not. It's my thing. So if I'm not going to be, madly in love with it, of course nobody's going to be that way.
Mhm.
I have to be the one that's going to be the passionate one. And that's like, we each have to be our own advocate for ourselves, and even people who like want to have a traditional life. Like, a lot of my friends with their traditional lives, I'll tease them like, oh, you suburban, mom with 2 kids or whatever. But like, they chose that because that's what they wanted.
Sure.
And perfect. If that's what you want,
Absolutely.
do that. But if it's not, then don't.
Uh-huh. Absolutely agree with you too. You got, find your own path. Find your own path is just critical to becoming who you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can see you're very passionate about what you're doing today.
Yes.
Which is awesome. I love that. It doesn't matter what you're doing when you're passionate about it. I love seeing that. Can you tell me, is there something about what you've transitioned into doing? Was there some place where you knew this was going to light things up for you, that doing improv and then heading into teaching soft skills, what was happening inside you that triggered the knowledge that this is mine?
It was really strange. Like in Denver, I would do these one-off workshops, and I would go to these various like camps and conferences and retreats, and I would do these one-offs. And I would always get really positive feedback, and then it would be over, and that was always like the frustrating thing to me. Like, oh, these people had so much fun over 2 hours, but then they go home and I might never see them again. Mm-hmm. And it was, once I got here and I realized that it was literally a clean playing field and that I could set up a training center that had multiple levels that people would go through, and to watch them, to watch someone come in the door the first day in level 1 and be a complete introvert and be scared to death about what they're about to do, having no idea what they're about to do, and just the body language, all of it. And then to see them continue on through the levels 2, 3, 4 and graduate. And level 5, create and produce your own show, and they're doing it not because they want to perform and get in a troupe afterwards, but because they want to conquer that fear of doing it. And they've been with me through the whole time, and it's not just my curriculum, but it's my value system. It's years and years and years of teaching and facilitating and practicing and performing improv and touching all these different things. It's like I have like this big improv stew with all these ingredients, and my students and my graduates and now my troupe members, they feed back to me things that I've taught them over time. And we just have this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful community. Tiny, tiny, tiny and growing. But the value system is coming from me. So it's all about we before me, make your partner look brilliant, don't worry about being funny, take care of each other and have fun primarily. And to see this in action, and then they go back to their work and they take something into their office, and I've gone into people's workplaces that I've had in class and then touched their whole work, and they never in a million years when they came in on day 1, level 1, would have ever thought to have like the crazy improv teacher in town come into their office to work with their executive director,
Sure.
It's like a wave.
Yeah, sure. That's very cool. So you've done some really cool things. You've been a marketing person in multiple situations. You've come out and made a huge difference in the lives of animals, feral cats specifically, and now you've got the wonderful stuff you're doing in Florida. What's the most important thing in life?
Hey, Sandy. Oh, they would not have the front door open. Go around the back door. Oh, I don't know anything about what they're doing down there then. Okay. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. That's the best to interrupt when somebody's thinking and trying to deal with the question that I've had yet. It's almost like you're like waving some money. Come over here. Interrupt us.
That whole business about getting on an airplane and they teach you the safety lesson and it's like, take care of the oxygen for yourself before you give it to someone else. I kind of feel like that has to do with life. And there's a few improv lessons that I teach in the classroom where I give that analogy. But I feel like you kind of have to take care of yourself first to figure out what's going to make you the best version of you so that you can show up and be the best version of yourself for others. You know, and I loved the animal welfare work. It drained the hell out of me, and you know, I burned out on it, and it couldn't be a lifelong career for me. But this is something that feeds me regularly, and it makes me, you know, a better version of myself to be able then to interact with others.
Sure.
Right, Morgan? Does improv make me a better version of myself?
Yes.
Very cool. Well, this has been really, really interesting and really fun to learn about what you're doing. If I swing through Florida, I know where I'm coming in and stopping to see some improv. Yeah, I definitely have to figure out how to swing down there and see your place in action. It sounds very interesting. So if anybody wants to know more about you or get in touch with you, what are the best ways for them to go about doing that?
Well, it's the Adventure Project, and it's www.adventure-project.com.
Okay, very good. We'll make sure to get that up on the website with this conversation. And I always wrap up with the same question. And that question is, what question did I forget to ask you?
Oh, the question I would imagine you would ask after my crazy path would be, where to next?
So now answer that question, where to next?
I think the next place might be out of the country.
Oh, really? Say more.
I don't have any plans, so there's nothing to tell. I have no secrets. But there's a couple of spots in Mexico that have been on the radar. But I'm not done with here anytime soon, so.
We'll take that with a grain of salt.
And I still have a few too many cats to go across the border. So.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
I mean, I'm down to 3.5, but you know, I need to be a little bit more free.
Totally understand.
Before border crossings.
Well, thank you very much for spending the time with me today and sharing your story. I have really enjoyed hearing it, and I look forward to coming and checking it out in Florida someday. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jay.